Hey everyone, welcome back to the Photo Business Success Podcast. I am your host, Morgan, and I'm here with my co host, Megan. Today, we are going to be talking about necessity, what it is, and how to get it, all of the things related to it.
But before we actually get started on that, Morgan, I want to talk about I just give kind of a disclaimer because I think necessity can be even in our last episode, I think there can be maybe some discomfort around some of the things that we talked about with like I dropped $68 on steak and so I'm not worried about the $68 for groceries and that can feel really insensitive in a time where like people are worried about paying rent and where like inflation is at an all-time high and things can feel really scary. And so like we're not insensitive to that, but as we get further into I think what are a lot of mindset, I wanted to make sure that we gave a disclaimer to you guys, to our listeners and viewers that as much as we feel those things, like we know those things are real, we're not unaware of them or insensitive to them. We are if you're feeling really sensitive to that, this might not be the podcast for you or maybe it's not the time for you to be listening to this show because we're going to continue to go into almost like the land of delusion and like necessity is one of those areas where like people are if you walk the road of necessity, people are going to call you crazy. They're either going to call you crazy or they are going to I don't know. I mean, like I think that's probably they're probably just going to call you crazy or they're going to call you selfish.
Greedy.
And so as we embark on this journey, I want you to know that we've been called all of those things. We've been told that we are all of those things. And to the nth degree, I personally have been told, I've had some really mean spirited things said about me. And so just before we dive in, we just want to give you an invitation to say, hey, this isn't the right time for me to be listening to this podcast, or maybe this podcast will never be for me. Not every episode has to be for you, and not every podcast about photography has to be for you. This for us is this is how we've won. This is how we continue to be winners through honestly very challenging circumstances. And so, without further ado, Morgan, what the heck is necessity?
Yeah, so necessity is basically the need to make more in your business because you need to support your lifestyle, your choices, whatever it may be. And so it's basically the push to do more in your business. And I think kind of going off of what you just said about like being called greedy and things like that, necessity is not about greed. Necessity is about leveling up our business and to give us the life that we want and also to help others the way that we want to because we are able to make the money. We're not blind to the fact that like money equals power and like
It
that
can. It
it
can.
can. And I don't mean power in a negative way. I mean like
Oh, yeah.
the ability to do things. So, like and Megan and I have spoken about this many, many times about how, like, her heart is in, like, helping women get out of human trafficking situations, and my heart is in helping, animals and things like that, and we know by our ability to make more money, we're able to support those
Mhm.
situations and foundations and charities that we want to because we have made the money that we have extra to be able to give. And that is our goal with creating necessity in our businesses is to help us level up so we can make an impact on the world in the way
Yeah.
that we choose.
Yeah. And sometimes so, like, you gave some great examples, Morgan, of, like and I actually was just as we started talking about this, I was remembering back to how Black Friday of last year, I bought a bunch of cold weather gear
Yeah.
from Uniqlo, and so I'm from California. We don't have harsh winters really, at least, like, Southern California. Sure, it can get into the 50s, but, like, it's not cold compared to even here in Nashville, which is the South, you know, we have we have some cold,
We have frigid winters.
bitter. Yeah, and, like, I remember crying my first time that there was, like, a snowstorm and thinking there are so many people, like, my office window faced this overpass that I knew, like, had a has a huge homeless encampment,
Right.
and I remember, like, weeping at my desk and thinking, "There are people who are freezing to death right now." And, ooh, like, that's still, like, I think I start to think about that when the weather turns, like, I am sitting here in my, like, my warm sweats and going, "Woo, like, fall's here, it's 50s."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm so excited, and, like, they're out there and they're thinking, like, "Oh, man, like, the weather's turning, fall's coming, like, I wonder if I'm going to get" so emotional, wow. I wonder if, like, if I'll get another pair of socks, like, I wonder if I'll find a hat. And so last year, my business partner and I spent like $1,000 on cold weather gear, and I told you about it, and I told a couple other people about it. And as business owners, like, that was just one of the most incredible things that we could do, was just to go like, yeah, I have $1,000 in my business account that I can
Right.
just that, no problem. I can go buy cold weather stuff for people who will literally potentially freeze to death at the worst, but like at the best, they're going to experience extreme discomfort and probable illness. And so necessity can be one of those things where, like, when you hear kind of the gurus talk about it, it might sound like it's greedy. It might sound like it's just about like being able to buy that Lamborghini. But for most of us, we have things that we actually care about. And it's
Right.
not it's not just the homeless or the sex trafficked or the animals who are in dire need of being rescued. It's not just like the change that needs to happen in the world, but it's also that, like, every single one of us, whether you grew up in the best home or the worst home, every single one of us wants to raise our families in a better situation than we
Right.
had. We wanna give our kids more than we had, and so necessity is about, like, it's about your family, and maybe you're someone who doesn't wanna have kids, but I bet you want to have quality time with your partner, and so it can be about taking that vacation that you guys have always dreamed of, or maybe it's not so much a vacation as just, like, an adventure trip, or maybe it's about having the apartment or the house that
Mhm.
is, like, the dream house, and, like, there's nothing wrong. I think maybe the misconception around having and wanting more is that there isn't enough to go around, and there totally is. There is more than enough for everyone to have everything. And so you having your dream house doesn't mean that I can't have my dream house. And so necessity is, it's a little bit of a bubble that you get to put yourself into in order to help you drive forward and do what you need to do in the world. And that doing can be so many things.
I also wanna say that it's not just about, like, what you have, but it's and what like, donating, but I think it's also about, like, what you can give, and that was something what I mean by that is we've talked about this before that, like, one of my goals has always been to be able to let my dad retire and have them move to Tennessee and pay for a house. Will they let me do that? Absolutely not. But that has always been my goal. We were able to do that with my in-laws, and if it hadn't been for me, like, working hard, not that my husband hasn't worked hard, he's worked incredibly hard, but, like, the necessity that I built in my business so we could have this extra money, we wouldn't have been able to move them down here. Now they live a mile from us, and all so they had planned on moving down here, but the places they were looking at were horrible, and because that was what they could afford because, they were coming from an area that was the cost of living was so much less than here, but we were able to give them a beautiful home here, and they live a mile from us now and watch my daughter every day. And obviously, like, I didn't move them down here so they could be our babysitter. They'd been down here years before Cam was born. But it's always been, like, my intention to bring our family to Tennessee because that's where they wanted to be. They didn't wanna be stuck in Michigan and Ohio. And so I just wanted to say, like, it's not just selfishness, it's also about, like, what you can, like, give back to your family or friends or whoever. So
And
I just
friends
wanted to
is like friends is a great example too. Like, I've had so many times where I've been able to bless my friends in my life, and also times where, like, my friends have blessed me because and, like, you're one of them, Morgan, like, you've blessed me so much, and, sometimes it's like, "Oh, well, like, you don't have to," or, like, "I don't have to pay for that person," but
right,
but sometimes, like, okay, so when my dad died, like, I could have paid for myself to, like, eat out all the time, but, like, you and a couple people, like, sent me meals regularly, and
mhm,
when and that's something that, like, with necessity, you are creating extra. You don't always know what the extra is for,
right,
but you know that there will be a need, and you
or
can meet the need. And so, like, for me during that time to have so many people take care of me, send me flowers. Actually, I was gonna tell you this, but I completely forgot. Last night I couldn't sleep, and I just have been missing my dad a lot, and I went I went downstairs to just kind of, like, poke around in the kitchen, and I found that the brownie Ben& and Jerry's ice cream that you sent me,
mm,
and, like, I just sat there and ate it, and it like, even though you sent it to me because he had passed, just, like, gave me the time to just, like, reflect, and it's like, we don't know, like, that's I don't know, like, a $5 or $7, like, pint
yeah,
of ice cream. Like, it's not about the size of the gift or how much it cost or, like, what you sacrificed for it, but, like, we don't know what a difference it makes in people's lives
other people's
that
lives.
we're creating extra so that they can, and, like, I think about, I don't know that my parents had any concept of necessity as a word, but, like, they knew what they were doing. They knew they wanted to
Yeah,
give us a better life, and, like, my brother went to 4 years of actually 5 years of private college, and my parents paid for it, and, like, that's an incredible gift that I know my dad worked hard for,
yeah,
and, like, there have been so many things along our lives that my parents were able to do for us, not because they knew exactly what we were going to need, but they had the necessity to give us the better life.
yeah, and so I kinda wanna dive into, like, what does necessity look like, and I guess, like, how to know when you need more necessity.
Yeah.
So, for me, and I think this is, like, pretty across the board, necessity is like, I know that I need necessity when I feel compliant and or complacent with where I am in my life. If I'm like, "Okay, everything's good. You know, we've got the money we need. Our savings is great. You know, our house like it's easy to make the mortgage payment and the car payment and things like that. I know it's time for me to bring up necessity. And I remember when was it last year? Yeah, I guess last year we bought the Tesla. I was no, let me back up further than that. When I bought my Jeep, I remember the conversation with you about I had just had my first six-figure year. 2020 was my first six-figure year, and I was driving this crappy little Ford Escape that the transmission was about to go out. I had put 200,000 miles on it, and but, like, when I bought it, like, that was what we could afford, and it did create necessity. I didn't know it then, but it created necessity, and I remember thinking, "Okay, I need a new car." And we have the money to do that now, even though we just bought a house. Like, keep in mind, we had literally moved into our house, like, 5 months earlier. But I need a new car because mine's gonna die. And so my husband and I sat down and looked at finances, and we're like, "Okay, this is about what we can afford for a car." You know, and well, he asked me, he's like, "Can you afford a $600 a month car payment?" I'm like, "Yeah, no big deal. That should be fine." I said that confidently to him, but came back to you and said, "How am I gonna do this?" And you said, This is creating necessity. You have to work harder in your business. And that was the first I made like 60,000 more that year than I had the year prior. And it was because I bought this Jeep. And like I solely like put it on that, on buying the Jeep.
Can we
Yeah.
time out? Because I
Yeah.
just wanna talk about, like, the math of that, like, $600 a month needed equaled creating
Right.
$60,000 in a year, and, like, I know that's not quite 10x, but, like, it's close enough, and, like, that is the beauty of necessity, and, like, yeah, you paid taxes and you had expenses, and, like, it's not like you pocketed $60,000,
Right.
but the beauty of necessity is it could be little things, like, it can be like, for me, when I got Frankie, having a second dog, having a needy second dog was enough to create necessity. I actually got an incredible client right after I placed the order for her. Like, she hadn't
Yeah.
even come yet, and I got, like, this big client. And it's just one of those things where, like, we start when we it's kind of like betting on yourself, right? So, like, you bet on yourself, and by creating a new level that you have to rise to, and then you figure out ways to make it work. It's sort of going back to what we talked about last episode, where our reticular activating system will help us to like find a way to get what we're focused on. And like this is another necessity helps us to focus on something.
Yeah, so I wanna speak, like, directly to the photographers who are on the verge of full-time, because I think that this is so important because we all I know we've all, like, been in that place where, like we're like, "Okay, do I go full-time? Do I not go full-time?" Okay, I wasn't in that place, but, like, I'll explain that in a minute because that was a whole other thing. But where, like, do I go full-time? Like, I'm, like, so scared to. But if you have that push to go full-time, you're going to like, that's a necessity right there. Like, I don't know anything bigger than that. And, that's going to give you the push you need to make the money you need to for your business. And if you have the dedication and the, like, self-control, I don't think that's the word I'm looking for, but
Discipline.
that's the word I was looking for, to work in your business full time, you will make the money. Like, that's what necessity is. You make it happen. And I think, like, my story is a good testament to that. I I was running my business and working a part-time job, which was like 30 hours a week. So not really part-time. And February 25th, 2020, I quit that job and was going to work part-time for my friend's company to do their social media management. She's also a photographer, was going to run their social media. Well, we know what happened 3 weeks later. COVID hit and she's like, "I don't really have anything for you to do because, we can't really book anything right now. We don't know what's happening." And I was like, "Well, what the hell am I supposed to do? Like, I can't get unemployment because, like, I quit my job and I can't get, like, severance from them or, anything like that because I quit. So, I guess I'm going full time." So, March 2020, I went full time, and that was my first year making six figures.
I
Um
think this is a perfect sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
But, like, this is an important point to make, is, like, sometimes you don't choose the necessity chooses you.
Yeah.
Like, I've had friends who, like, they're married, they're, like, gonna have kids eventually, and then, like, they get pregnant
Pregnant.
unexpectedly, and it's like, "Oh," and, like, you watch how they grow in that 9-month period, and it's like, all of a sudden, they went from, like, always having car trouble to being able to buy, like, the perfect mom car. They went from, like, having a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment where, like, things were really cramped to being able to get the house, and
You figure it out.
yeah, you figure it out, and, that is actually one of the beauties of necessity, and I think that, like, we all recognize forced necessity as a force for good, but we don't necessarily well, hopefully we all, but I don't know. There are some negative people in the world. But, like, the idea of creating that necessity for yourself feels a little, like, weird, and like,
Mhm.
should we talk about some way I don't know, is this a good point to talk about some of the ways that you can do that?
Like forced necessity on yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely. I think so. I mean, I had started talking about how last year we were we bought a Tesla.
Mhm.
And we first of all, we were in that having a kid phase, so we had to get a new car because my husband was driving a 2012 Dodge Avenger that had no heat on the passenger side, which, by the way, we could have replaced earlier. He just had an emotional attachment to it. But so buying that car built necessity for us and created necessity. Also, having a timeline on, like, when you become a mom also created a ton of necessity for me. So, I made the majority of my income last year in the first 6 months of the year because my daughter was born in June,
Mhm.
because I was forced into that situation. But also, like, you can you can put yourself in other situations that aren't necessarily like, "Oh, you have to do this because of this." Like, I mean, I remember do you wanna go ahead?
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, I remember you called me one day and said, "Hey, I just had a meeting with a trainer. I can't afford him, but I'm gonna hire him anyway, and I'm gonna figure out how to make the money." And I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds reasonable." Now, if you would have had that conversation with my husband, he would have been like, "Megan, absolutely not. I think you need to go listen to some Dave Ramsey." It makes not everybody is wired for that,
Right.
but as entrepreneurs, we have to be.
Yeah, and so that I've forgotten about that. That's a good example. Like so interestingly, like about this like forced necessity kind of thing. My one of my close friends bought a house and her new house was like way smaller. Like she went from I think like 1900 square feet to like maybe
It's 12.
1,100 square feet? Yeah, maybe 1,200, like, it's tiny. And so, like, this big giant couch that she had bought for her big giant living room was not going to fit. And so I was like, "Oh, like, I don't use the couch in my office. It would be the perfect couch for you.
Yeah.
Like, you should take my couch." And so I gifted her that couch. I also like, there were a lot of things like, "Oh, like, I don't like the shoe cabinet that I bought for my
Or
back door, like, "You should take that." Like, she was asking me, like, where I bought it, and I was like, "You should just take it." And there were several things like that that I just, like, gave her and didn't think about, and then realized, actually, I really love the couch in my office. Oh, well, like, I don't need that shoe cabinet, but I did use that shoe cabinet to store a lot of non-shoe things. Okay, now I don't have a place for, like, this stuff and that stuff, and so, like, as weird as it is, it it was an unexpected creation of necessity
necessity.
situation for me, and so, like, the difference here or the key here is to look at that not as an opportunity or not as like, "Oh, wow, I" it's about, like, the perspective, the way that you look at it. So, I could be like, "Shoot, I shouldn't have given that couch to her. I should have just, like, sent her the link where she could buy it herself." Like, that would have been just fine. But, like, rather to look at it as, "What a great opportunity. I love the couch, but I would like it in a different color. Maybe this is the perfect time and opportunity for me to get a whole makeover for my office," or really not a whole makeover, but to finish the makeover that I started last year around this time and, like, to finally hang up all the stuff on the wall and the whatever. And and so, like, necessity doesn't have to be about, like, adding a $600 a month car payment. It doesn't have to be about buying a new house or, like, having a kid before you're ready, like, for the love of God, don't do that.
Don't do that.
Do that. But it can be, like, the tiniest things. It can be, like, you have a perfectly good iPhone and you have just decided that you're gonna buy the new iPhone, or you have a perfectly functioning MacBook Pro and you are going to just get the 2 years newer version. Like, you
Yeah.
don't have to have a super strong, compelling reason. It doesn't have to be this like huge payment. And honestly, like some things are not even like, I wouldn't even call them like necessarily like financial in the like raising of necessity. It can be like deciding that you want to be a like that next level version of yourself. And like,
Yeah.
will that cost money? Yeah. But it's more about like, oh, I'm going to be the kind of person who goes on vacation 4 times a year. I'm going to be the kind of person who doesn't buy. This is like my new thing is like, this is my real aspiration right now is I want to get rid of all the plastics in my wardrobe. So I'm going to have only stuff that is cotton, linen, wool, basically like that's it. Because
Okay.
like I'm so tired of everything I own being like polyester, rayon, like all of that is just plastic and the frequency of plastic is the same as a dead body and like I don't need that in my life. So like, that's like it's that. It's like being the kind of person who's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm gonna spend, $50 on a frickin' t-shirt instead of $10 on a t-shirt, and also know that it's gonna last me longer." So,
Yep.
it like, it can be tied to identity just as much as it can be to financial, and, like, ideally, it will be a bit of both. Like, usually it's stronger one or the other, but it will be both.
Yeah. Else you want to touch on
I don't think
with
so. You?
necessity? I don't think so. Okay, guys. So we're going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for joining us. You can find us at our
Hey, we're gonna put out our show notes for you guys. In our show notes will be our wedding multiplier toolkit. This is the 12 plus a bonus ways that you can book more weddings from the weddings that you already have. Also, linked in our show notes will be a link to the Facebook group that Morgan, I mean, like it's technically both of us, but really it's Morgan, that Morgan is doing an incredible job with. This is really for like-minded photographers, people like you who are looking to build something like more lasting and bigger than just you. So I think that's it. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Photo Business Success Podcast. We will see you next time around.
Bye, guys.